back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. All right, and what I have, those papers that I gave, you can just, those are, it's kind of like the Ten Commandments. You can ask somebody, what did God create on what day, and they know what He created, but that just kind of gives you numerically when He did it. So we'll be going over that later. I wrote 4 theories on the board. Yeah, that's 4. And then 2 Hebrew words, and then the word "and." So, and we'll be looking at those here in a second. There's 2 types of views when you look at creation. When you look at the book of Genesis, you have creation, and then you have speculation. Creation is found, of course, in the book, in Genesis. And then speculation is made by people who do not want to acknowledge that God is the God of the universe, or God created the heavens and the earth. Evolution came about because they want to knock God off of His throne. They do not like that there is a God of the universe that judges, that controls all things. That has written history, is writing history, and will continue to write history. So you have creation and you have speculation. Genesis chapter 1 has to be accepted by faith alone. We have to accept that. No one was there in Genesis chapter 1. I don't know, I've never met anybody that says, boy, when I turned on the light, when God said, let there be light, the first thing he saw was Ross. So, nobody was there. So we go on faith. We believe in salvation by what? Faith. And that is something that we cannot see. We cannot see salvation. We can see the results of salvation. And yet we go with faith on that. And I think it would be much easier to go with faith on the creation because we can actually see it. We can actually see the trees and the stars and the moon and things like that. There is another theory that I forgot to write down. You can write it down. It is called the steady, S-T-E-A-D-Y, steady state, like S-T-A-T-E, like state, steady state theory. You can add to that, so there's 5 actually, steady state theory. All right? It is the most God-centered book. We've already looked at that in our God-centered verses or chapter that are in the Bible. Now, there are also 2 other theories. There is another theory that we're going to look at. Now, the secret things belong to God, correct? We are going to study the book of Genesis as it is written in the Bible. We are not going to say, well, this is how it is, even though it's not written in there. We are going to look directly at the Scriptures. Okay? People will ask certain questions about Genesis that are not found in the Scriptures. But they will say, well, this is how it is. Do you have proof in the Scriptures? No, but in the conversation. Okay? Because the secret, if God wanted us to know it, guess where He would have put it at? In the Bible. All right? When you get to heaven, if you think about it, then you can ask God the questions that you want to know about Genesis. But I think by the time we get there, we could care less. Because we're not going to be thinking about an old earth. Old things have passed away. The earth that we are living on, it is an earth that is going to be one day destroyed. It has been flooded by water once, but one day it is going to be destroyed. Everything you see, everything that you come in contact with as far as the earth goes is going to be destroyed. And it was created, of course, by God. There are the theories that I want to look at. Okay? Now, the steady state theory is one theory. The Big Bang, the gap theory, the revelation theory, and then, of course, what we should believe is the 7-day creation theory, that God created everything in 7 days. And you can find that in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11. It tells us in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11. And if you want to write that verse down, you can. Exodus 20, verse and it says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth." So if it was good enough for Moses to write that down, it's good enough for us. So we should believe that God created it in 7 days. You will read a lot of, I've got 15 commentaries on Genesis, and not one of them agrees on anything. They will all agree that God made the heaven and the earth, but there is one thing that they all split on. There's 3 things that they are going to split on. Between verses 1 and 2, Genesis chapter 1, they cannot agree on what happens in between those verses, or if anything did happen. Was there a pre-earth? And Genesis chapter 1 is just a aftermath of that pre-earth being recreated. And then, where in Genesis is Satan cast out of heaven? So those are basically the 3 things that people speculate or want to talk about. And we're going to look at those tonight, or try to tonight, I promise. If we can't tonight, we will next week. The steady state theory. Steady state theory says that the universe has always existed. Where we're at has always been here. But that new matter continuously is being created. New cells are being formed. New matter is continuously being created. That is the steady state theory. You don't hear much. All of these theories have one thing in common, except the 7-day creation theory. It takes God out of the equation as being omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, sovereign. Takes him out of the equation. So you have the steady state theory. You have, and I remember studying this in high school. I remember, I'm not going to say it because my little kid listen. My science teacher, back when you could say this in school, said, "Now listen guys, I don't believe this, and you shouldn't believe it, but we got to study the Big Bang Theory." He said, "It's a bunch of hogwash, but we got to study it." So that's how we studied it. Now it is something that is accepted. It is universally accepted. So there is a Big Bang Theory that there one day, billions of years ago, and the round number that they like to use is 50 billion. I don't know why. It's just I think they just grabbed it out of the air. We're going to say 50 billion years ago, something happened. Something exploded. 2 molecules or 2 cells or 2 something done this and exploded. And guess what? We're here.
We're here.
You know what that reminds me of? You remember when Moses came down off the mountain, and Aaron's like, "I don't know how that calf got there. Everybody gave me all their gold, and I threw it in the fire, and this cow popped out of it." That's what it basically sounds like. And if you study, and I'm not going to bore you with the facts about space. Again, I know you probably think, "Geez, I got to go to NASA or something. We talk space so much." With all the billions of galaxies we have, these zillions of stars, the planets that we have, everything that we have in space, there is no way that 2 things got together and pow, exploded, and we're here. This is something that is interesting. If Moses wrote, and I had this written down here. Here it is. I found it in the commentary. I wanted to share this with you guys last week. There is a mathematician that come up with the ratio of if Moses wrote Genesis by accident. That if he just said, he started writing. If Moses wrote Genesis just by accident, this is what he would say. It would be like taking a chance, writing Genesis chapter 1 in the way by accident would amount to 1 in 31 sextillion. That is 1 followed by 31 zeros. 31 followed by 31 zeros. If he wrote it, that's the chance, that's it. Now, if we break it down to what we can think about, he says if you take 31 sextillion, and we were going to make a lot, we was going to produce 31 sextillion lottery tickets. and we had one chance of picking out the right lottery ticket out of 31 sextillion, this is how long it would take to print lottery tickets. That would call for 8 million printing presses, each capable of producing 2,000 tickets a minute, running day and night without stopping for 5 million years. And us saying, okay, reaching there, you make sure you get the right one the first time. That would, if Moses wrote it by accident, that's what it would be like. That is why it is under the inspiration of the, like we said last time, if he did get his from records and written down, still written under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. So that's why we believe that Moses wrote, of course, not only Genesis, but the Pentateuch. All right? Now, looking at the Big Bang Theory, happened, it exploded, and then we're here. Praise the Lord. Then you have the gap theory. And who has heard of the gap theory? Not the Gap when you go to buy the Gap clothes at the Gap. The gap theory. There is these theory. This will go hand in hand with a day-age theory. So you have the gap theory and the day. I don't have that up there. Gee whiz. Day-age theory. All right. Gap and day-age. The gap theory says that there is a 50 million year gap between verse 1 and verse 2. And when when you find it, when the scientist finds these fossils, they're like, this is 100 million years old, this fossil. Really? Okay. So there is a gap theory that says between verse 1 and verse 2, something happened. Okay? They don't know. They speculate what happened, and we'll look at that here in a second. I just want to kind of give these out to you. Then there is a day-age theory. And by the way, the gap theory only came about in the 1800s. So it has not been around very, very long. There is a day-age theory that says not only was there a gigantic gap between verse 1 and 2, but each day does not equal a 24-hour day. It is equivalent to millions of years. One day, he would say, on the first day God created blah. 1 million, 2 or 3 million years would pass by, and he would create something else. Instead of going on the 24-hour day, 7 days a week theory like we believe. I hope you guys believe that. So there is a day-age theory. Then there is a revelation theory. And what is weird, people believe this stuff. They really do. There is a revelation theory that says that God did not create the earth in 7 days, but he just revealed his plans to Moses in 7 days. That God took millions of years to create this earth, but he explained it to Moses in 7 days. So, and then there's the good old-fashioned 7-day creation. Like that's what we're going to be studying. But I wanted to kind of give you those theories, and you can go home and you can look at them and you can study them if you would like. Now, every one of those have something in common. It is evolution. You have Darwin's evolution that has been around for a while. And there is something that has come out recently, and scientists have almost basically done away with evolution. They're calling it the 5-year plan. Have y'all heard about this? Scientists have come up with this that say if they cannot figure out the creation within 5 years, they'll come up with another plan on how to figure it out. So every 5 years they're coming up with something different. If they want to know what the world was created, all you got to do is read the Bible. They can go to Walmart and get them. Quit spending, these universities quit spending billions of dollars trying to figure out how it was created. Go to Walmart and get you a $10 Bible and do away, pretty well sums it up. And I wrote down some things today that kind of come to mind, and I want to go over these. Evolution is absolutely impossible. Matter, which everything is made up of matter, cannot on any level organize itself all by itself. It cannot do that. If I have an egg, just a regular egg with an egg yolk, whatever in it, and I set it on the table, and I don't touch it, I don't put a hen on it to hatch it or whatever, guess what's going to happen to that egg? Is it going to sprout arms, sprout legs, sprout a mind, sprout reasoning, thinking, organization, complexity, and grow? What's it going to do?
It's going to rot.
It's going to rot. So, is it going to go up or is it going to go down? It is going to go down. Matter cannot, by itself, go up. Matter always, unassisted from an outside source, goes down. Okay? Please keep that in mind. A cell, we're made up of how many cells? How many did you learn in school? How many they tell you? Billions, zillions, quadrillion cells. A bunch. A cell cannot increase in complexity or add information to itself by itself. If I was to take Parker, is he in school yet? If I was to take Parker, never been in school, don't know how to read, write, nothing, just take Parker. And I sit Parker down at a school desk, and I give him a book on quantum physics. So, all right, Parker, have at it, son, figure it out. You know what he's going to do? About 30 seconds, he's going to be up doing something else. Do you know why? He does not have an outside source supplying him information. You have to have something to supply you information to do something. DNA has to have an outside source to supply. So that is what is wrong. Evolution says this, and I'm going to try to break it down in a nutshell. You got a mud hole. Something happened. Oh, well, who put the mud hole there first? I don't know. Well, no, wait a minute. If there is no God, who put the mud hole there? Well, when the two cells got together, okay, who made the two cells that made the Big Bang? Every argument always comes back that there is a greater being than us. They can't deny that. They just don't want to deny it is a God it is a sovereign God. Okay? All right, we got a mud hole. There was something that that slime got in the mud. Well, who put the slime there? That don't matter. Yes, it does. If you want to make an argument, who put the slime there? Somebody. Well, who is that somebody? Is that somebody made? Was that somebody formed? Did somebody make that somebody? Yes. Well, who was the person that made that somebody? It always goes back to God, doesn't it? There's no argument. I've got a mud hole in my backyard. Guess what's come out of it? Mud. Nothing. Nothing has ever come out of it. So, matter cannot increase. Everything decreases. In order for man to advance in society, guess what we have to have? Information. We have to be supplied information. When you go build a bridge, architects, do they just wake up one day and go, going to go build an Empire State Building? Don't need to know how to do it, just going to go build it. It's not going to last. You have to have information. It has to be supplied. So there is no organism that can always advance. It always decreases. So, if you have a child, we'll go back to the child. And you do not show that child any love. The only thing you give that child is a place to sleep, food, some clothes, and that's it. You don't show him anything else, supplying him anything from the outside as far as attention, love, caring, hugging, taking him outside. Is that child going to advance or decrease? He is going to decrease. Do you know why? There is no outside information supplying what he needs. Who supplied the outside information? God. Okay? So, with that said, all right? With that said, you can break Genesis chapter 1 down into two, and from verse 2 to 13. Yeah, verse 2 to 13, it is the establishment of life, how life is established. In verses 14 through 31, it is the law of the earth. Law of the earth. All right. I hope I'm not boring you, but we're going to get into something a little bit different that goes with Genesis.
Would you say those verses again?
I got it written
14
down.
through 12.
12, 2 through 13, establishment of life. 14 through 31, law of the earth. Now,
Is that chapters or verses?
verses, this is just chapter 1, yes. Now, who has ever heard of dispensation? A dispensationalist. Dispensation is how God deals with man according to sin. Okay? If you're a dispensationalist. There are dispensations in the book of Genesis. There is dispensation of innocence. And that is going to run from creation. We'll go over the next one next week. From creation to the fall of man. Dispensation means pouring out. How God dealt in a particular way with sin. For instance, when Adam and Eve sinned, how did he deal with that situation? Huh?
Killed the animal.
Killed an animal and did what with that animal? Took the skin and what?
Covered
Covered them. That is how God dealt with the sin. So there's a dispensation, and it is the dispensation of innocence. And that runs from Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, all the way through Genesis chapter 2, verse 23. Now, looking at these words now that I have on the board, on the big board. You have the word Elohim, bara, and. Okay? Now let's look. In the beginning, and remember what I said, that they think something tragic. I'm saying they. Alright? Now, who's ever heard of J. Vernon McGee? He believes that something happened. He believes the gap theory. It's in his book. I've got his commentary at home. He believes something happened between verse 1 and 2. That there is something tragic happened between those two verses. He doesn't know. He speculates what he says happened. He is one of those that believe that. If you say, well, Brother Chris, I believe something happened between verse 1 and verse 2. Fine. This is what people will say happened, okay? Between verse 1 and verse 2, it says, in the beginning God created the heaven, not where he lives, but the heaven is actually the universe. Not the stars and the planets yet, but just where they're going to hang at. Created the heaven and the earth. Now, something you have to keep in mind is that mankind cannot create. The only person that can create is God. Man can make things from other things, but he cannot create. If I go down to Dobson Cabinet Company and I want some cabinets, it's like, all right, Sherman, I want some oak cabinets. But I don't want you to order the oak. I want you to create the oak. And I want you to create the nails and the glue and the paint and the varnish.
You can't afford that.
I mean, he can't do it. You know why? He can't create it. He can't create something out of nothing. And God created this with breath, with a voice. Mankind, he can make cabinets, but the only way he can make cabinets is by using what had been created by God. Okay? We are created in the image of who? God. All right. Now, it says in the beginning, God. And that word God in the Hebrew is going to be Elohim. It is going to be used, the only time it's used in the book of Genesis. It is Elohim. It means omni. It means all-knowing. That is what that means. He is all-knowing. He is Elohim. It is the word that was not spoken by the Hebrews. They did not speak this word. And that is where we get the JDEF, IJK, elemental P theory we went over last week. In the beginning, God, Elohim, created. That means it is bara. That is what that means. It means breath. Created means breath. Out of his breath he created. B-A-R-A, that is Hebrew. It is actually bara. This means breath. He breathed it. He spoke it in the beginning. All right. Do we there's always a starting point for everything, right? Is this a starting point for God? He's always been. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was God. John. In the beginning, God created. He breathed. He spoke it. All right? The heaven and the earth. Now, this is when people will speculate. I believe that it is a rapid succession. Just like with the book of Revelations, you'll notice when we're studying the 7-year tribulation, there is no great distance or great amount of time in between, right? It is boom, 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 boom. And it says in the earth, and they get this from Isaiah chapter 45, verse 18. Let me go there.
Isaiah
45:18. This is what it says. Open right. For thus saith the Lord, for thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it, he hath established it, he had created it not in vain. And the word vain means empty or void. All right? He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is none else. Now, it tells us in verse 2, and the earth was without form and void. But it tells us in Isaiah 45, sat too long, my legs asleep, 18, that he formed it not in vain. This is where they get the argument from. All right? They say that this is what they believe, or some believe, that the earth had already been formed. All right? And that Satan had been cast out of heaven in between verse 1 and verse 2. And when he was cast out, he was cast to earth, because where does he roam? The earth. And he is the one that made it without form and void. And what God is going to do is recreate what Satan messed up. Where's that in the Bible? It's not in the Bible. All right? They get that actually. Let me see if I can find it. I meant to write that down. From Ezekiel. I don't want to take a bunch of time trying to find this. I should have wrote it down. If I can't find it real quick, we'll just get right back. I don't want to spend a bunch of time. I'm trying to find it. Hold on just a second. Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 13, 14, 15, and 6. Okay, instead of me not counting them all. Ezekiel 28, 13 through 18. Because Eden is described as being a forest type place, right? With trees and water and animals. But if you look in Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 13, it says, Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. And who's the only person who's ever been in Eden? And there's one more person. Satan. Okay? I'm sorry. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was covering. Sardis, topaz, diamond, onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald. When you study Eden in Genesis, those aren't in there. It's not the same Eden that's described in Genesis. Now, they will say, okay, and then it says, Thou art the anointed cherub. I have set thee, what was the devil? He was an angel. Kicked out. And it says, Thou wast perfect in thy ways, and thy day was created, till iniquity was found in thee. It says, About the multitude of the merchandise they have filled in the midst of the violence that they have sinned. This is what is one of the theories. That there was an Eden, there was an earth. Again, I don't believe this. I'm just giving you what, in case you get into the discussion with someone. There was an earth. Satan is kicked out. And this earth, or this Eden, is described in Exodus and Ezekiel 28 that I just read you. And when Satan is thrown out, remember we studied in the book of Revelation when that star fell, wormwood falls out of heaven, how it starts destroying the earth. That is when that happens. And then God has to recreate what Satan messes up. And that's why it is without form and void. Okay? That is one theory. Now, then they want to know, is this when Satan was thrown out? Guess what? The Bible does not tell us. The secret things belong to who? God. Then they will say that Satan was thrown out, if I can find it, in between, let me see if I can find it. He was thrown out in between chapter 2, verse 25, and chapter 3, verse 1, because he is brought into the picture. Now, the serpent. They say that's when he was thrown out of heaven in that time. We don't know. We just know he was. All right? If you want to study that, and go ahead. But I don't know when. I just know he was. All right? Now, there is a word that is "and." This is the word that we use how many times a day? Thousands. If you ever read if a kid ever has to write a story, a short story in elementary, he'll use that word 1,000 times. And it is a word that is used except in verse 1 in every verse. And it is a word that is a polysyntotone. Who's ever heard of that word? Polysyntotone means it is a word that is used repeatedly. If, and, but. Like me and Tanner went and we got a truck and it tore up and he fixed it and it is what it means. The word "and," what it means, and kids, it does not give you a right to use this in every other word when you have to write something for school. That word "and" actually means instantly, from a previous point or from a previous action. It means no space or time. It is quickly. Andy did this, Andy did this, Andy did this, Andy did this. So that is what the word "and." It is actually W-A-W in Hebrew. It is "wah," and it is very repetitive. It is quickly, no time or space in between. So that is why I believe there is no time gap between verse 1 and verse 2. Because it says, "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and." It is quickly. It is another step. So, does that make sense? All right. After church, don't jump me and say, "I don't believe a word you said," because put a boot in your throat. So, look at this. "And the earth was without," it does that say "had become." What does it say? Was. That time it was. There was no beginning to this. It says the earth was without form and void. Form and void means empty. But in the Hebrew, it means something different. It means uninhabited. There was nothing there. It means it was not this. I was watching that movie. I like old B-movie horror things. And there was a movie on last night called The Blob with Steve McQueen. Y'all remember that? You watched that.
I went to the movies and saw that. That's how old I am.
So I told that. Hey, did you know the girl who played Helen in Andy Griffith was in? Okay, anyway, getting off the subject. There was this red blob thing, and I never could figure out, they would scream and it would just kind of blob around to them. Why couldn't they just walk around it? But anyway, that is what, when we have without form and void, think the earth looked like. That God created this blob and then thought, wait, that don't look right. Let me fix it up differently. Everything God has done for the very first time has always been perfect. There is no, everything He's done has been perfect. If you say, well, it was without form, it was a blob and it didn't work right, well, we can equate that with salvation. What if He brought salvation to us and it's without form and void, in the way we think about it? We're in trouble, ain't we? Form and void means it was uninhabited. There was nothing there living. Okay? And we discussed this, and I'm fixing to quit, and we discussed this last week, Sunday night, 2 weeks ago. Why did God form man? Huh? To praise Him. If you look back in Isaiah, what was that verse I gave you? Isaiah 45:18? If I can find it. Isaiah 45:18. I want to read this again. For thus saith the Lord God that created the heavens, God Himself that formed the earth had made it. He hath established it. He created it not in vain, but He formed it to be what? Inhabited. That is what without form and void means. It's uninhabited. It is not like Steve McQueen and that other girl running from this big red thing that's blobbing around in the supermarket. It was not a blob. Keep this in mind. And I challenge you to do this. Go home, go outside, get you some mud, put it in water, and leave it on your counter. And I will give you my house if something grows out of it. If a person, if you wake up one morning, there's a guy sitting at the kitchen table, like, hey man, what's going on? Where'd you come from? Yeah, I think of it like this. If you believe in evolution, you believe that peanuts grow on trees. And if peanuts grow on trees, they don't. Okay? Dear Heavenly Father, we love you and we thank you. We want to thank you, dear God, that you have given us this book and you have explained it all. Dear God, we ask you to open our minds and our hearts, dear God, and we help us as we study this to apply it to our days and to apply it to our lives, that we can pass it on to our kids and to generations. Dear God, the great thing about you creating not only us, but you created salvation and you've made a way. We love you and we thank you. In your name we pray. Amen.